Why did the dust taste like iron that morning? Grace Mallory tasted it as she exhaled, standing alone on the cracked parade ground. The Wyoming sun had only just broken over the ridgeline, but already the heat pressed down, flattening the horizon, baking the scent of gun oil and sweat into the dirt. She rolled her shoulders once, feeling bruises tug beneath her tank top like hidden wires. Her knuckles ached. Her right knee had a subtle hitch from a winter she didn't talk about. But she stood, boots square, chin level, eyes forward. Someone had been laughing behind her for the last 5 minutes. The same dry, needling voice. She didn't look back. She had learned long ago that nothing good waited when you turned toward the noise. Nice bruises, princess. Didn't know Fort Kessler had spa days. Private Wade Huxley said it loud enough to cut through the morning haze like a dull blade scraping metal. The formation shifted a little, chuckles rising, boots scuffing. He stepped back into line with a smirk, eyes flicking to the others, checking if they were watching. They were. That was the point. Grace let the words pass through her like wind through wire. No blink, no shift of weight. Dust clung to her skin like a second uniform. The bruises weren't from one bad day. They were the slow kind, the kind you earn, the kind that stay. Her silence was a choice, but also a shield. Behind her she heard someone mutter "Sarge" under their breath, testing the sound of it. How many push-ups does it take to snap a wrist, Sarge? Huxley again, lazier this time, pushing to see how far he could go. Or did you trip over your own ego? A ripple of low laughter spread across Bravo Squad. 2 years without a single female assigned. 2 years of easy rhythms, unspoken hierarchies. Now this stranger had been dropped into their midst without ceremony, transferred on special directive, whatever that meant. Whispers filled the barracks overnight. She was a desk jockey, she was recovering from an injury, she was somebody's pet project. Grace hadn't offered an introduction, hadn't volunteered a backstory. In the absence of truth, people get bold. The sun caught the scar under her left eye, a thin, uneven line, almost surgical, and for a heartbeat Huxley's grin faltered. She was motionless but not rigid, and there was something older than pride in the way she stood. She had the posture of someone who had been burned and still walked into the fire. From the rise just beyond the perimeter, General Thomas Barkley watched, hands behind his back, expression unreadable. He'd known the moment she stepped out of the Humvee that morning, this wouldn't be easy. Grace Mallory never sought attention. Yet wherever she went, history followed. He had brought her here for a reason, but reasons don't make the weight lighter. She stood in the heat, silent, while the bruises along her neck caught the sun like faded ink. She didn't defend herself, didn't look away, because she knew something the rest of them didn't. Respect earned in silence lasts longer than applause. Some of them were already betting she hadn't made it back from whatever had left those marks. General Barkley let the moment stretch until it became a wire. Then his voice cut across the field, calm, controlled, dangerous, like a warning wrapped in gravel. Call sign, Widow 27. Everything stopped. The laughter, the sideways glances, the smirks, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Private Huxley blinked, half confused, half annoyed. Widow what? Barkley stepped off the rise, boots meeting the dirt with a slow, measured rhythm, arms no longer behind his back but down at his sides, fists gently clenched. You just ran your mouth at Widow 27, son. The field didn't just go quiet, it tightened. Every man standing felt suddenly roped into something they didn't understand. Somewhere near the back, Private Keller, Arizona kid, 5 older brothers in the service, let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. No way, he whispered. Next to him, another cadet's eyes widened. They had heard the name in briefings, in ghost stories whispered at night watch. Widow 27 wasn't a soldier, she was a myth. A woman who went dark on comms for 5 days only to re-emerge dragging a bleeding squadmate through enemy fire. But that was legend, not this bruised, silent figure with dust in her hair. Barkley stopped a few feet from Huxley, looking him over like a slow-forming storm. You don't need to understand what it means, he said softly, but you'd better damn well remember it. Behind Grace, One of the older instructors slowly stood at attention, not because protocol demanded it, but because something inside him said he should. A ripple passed through the formation. Not just silence now, recognition. "Have you ever heard of Operation Ghost Line?" Barkley's voice was calm. Too calm, like the quiet right before something breaks. Huxley didn't answer at first. He was trying to gauge if this was still about him. "No, sir," he muttered at last. The general turned slightly, not to Huxley now, but to the rest of them, to the field gone dead still. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. 4 years ago, a 7-person recon unit was dropped behind the land divide. Remote, cold, hostile. They were sent to confirm intel on a weapons facility we weren't supposed to know existed. He paused, not for effect, but because saying it still cost something. What should have taken 48 hours turned into 8 days. A few recruits shifted quietly. Barkley continued. They were ambushed on day 2, 2 gone instantly. One bled out before sunrise, one vanished, never recovered, that left 3. The wind picked up again gently, but no one moved. One had shrapnel embedded so deep in his chest he could barely breathe. Another, their comm specialist, was knocked unconscious in the blast. He let the silence settle. And the last, she was shot through the thigh. 2 fractured ribs, no painkillers, no evac. Just 12 miles of ice and shadow between her and maybe survival. His eyes returned to Grace. She hadn't flinched, not once. She carried the comms guy on her back, dragged the wounded one on a makeshift sled rigged from broken pack straps and a snapped rifle barrel. No backup, no air support, just grit. The unit was silent, but Grace was somewhere else. Back then, blood in the snow, the sound of her own breath getting shorter every hour, a voice barely alive behind her. "If I pass out, don't stop. Just keep walking." She had kept walking, even when her vision blurred, even when she crawled the last 300 yards with him on her back because standing had stopped being an option. Now, standing under the Wyoming sun, Grace's hands were clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. Not out of anger, but because even now, even here, the ghost hadn't let go. Barkley's voice cut through her memory. "You think she came back for glory?" he asked the unit, eyes scanning. "She came back because not everyone who walks out of fire leaves the fire behind." For the first time, even the boldest among them looked away. Because what they had just heard wasn't a war story. It was a warning, and a wound that never really closed. Grace remained motionless, boots planted, the sun catching the thin sheen of sweat on her neck. She still hadn't said a word, but the silence had shifted. This time it didn't isolate her. It elevated her. Barkley exhaled through his nose, slow and steady, as if settling something heavy on the ground. "You think command sent her here?" He scanned the formation, cadets now standing straighter, breathing slower. "You think this was some reassignment, some favor, some pity transfer?" He took a few steps, pausing in front of them. Sergeant Grace Mallory had every right to walk away. She could have taken the discharge. She could have gone home with honors, with full clearance, and no one would have questioned it. He let the beat fall. But she didn't. His voice sharpened, not louder, just firmer. "She asked to come back." Several cadets shifted. The youngest, actually blinked like he'd misheard. Not to sit behind a desk, not to write reports or pose for recruitment posters. Barkley turned slightly, eyes landing back on Grace. "She asked for the hardest assignment we have, field instructor for pre-deployment cadets. That means you." He didn't need to say the rest. Every person standing there now realized this wasn't some battered soldier trying to hang on. This was a leader who chose to come back to teach the next generation, not with stories but with scars. Barkley's tone softened just a hair. She didn't return because she had to. She returned because she remembers what happens when training fails. No one spoke. No one needed to. Because sometimes leadership doesn't come wrapped in medals or fanfare. Sometimes it looks like a woman with bruised arms, a tight jaw, and fire in her silence. And in that moment the squad no longer saw her as the one who got sent here. They saw her as exactly who she was, the one who volunteered, the one who endured, the one you shut your damn mouth and learned from. Grace kept her gaze fixed on a point beyond the horizon. She heard Barclay's words but didn't let them settle. Words could not rebuild what Ghost Line had taken, but they could build something else, discipline in these kids before it was too late. That was why she had come back. Not to be saluted, not to be remembered as a myth, but to make sure the next time someone was crawling through ice and shadow, they'd know how to keep moving. Private Huxley lowered his eyes. The swagger was gone. He felt the weight of everyone's silence pressing on him like a long shadow. He wanted to say something, an apology, a joke, anything, but the words stuck. He simply nodded once and stepped back into line. Grace inhaled slowly. The sun was higher now, burning the scars on her neck like a brand. She thought of 26 faces, names, voices, some already fatting. She squeezed her hands once more, then loosened them. Today wasn't about her ghosts. It was about these recruits and what they would learn before the world tested them. Barclay gave a final nod. "You've got one standing right in front of you," he said quietly, "and you didn't even know it." No one clapped, no one sneered. That was louder than any noise. Grace exhaled. Dust tasted like iron again. Why did the mess hall sound different that night? Grace noticed it before she even crossed the threshold. Same steel doors, same scuffed linoleum, same line of recruits shuffling trays past lukewarm vats of eggs and chili, but the noise had changed. Quieter. The usual clatter still echoed off the walls, but the laughter was gone. Conversations broke off as she walked by, not out of malice, not even out of awkwardness, something else, like the air after a storm. She moved through the line automatically, ladling food she barely tasted onto her tray. Her hands knew the motions, her body running on muscle memory. For years she had eaten in places louder than gunfire, colder than ice, places where a spoon could slip from a trembling hand and clatter like a grenade. Here, the clink of metal on metal was soft. She kept her eyes forward. At a table in the back corner she sat alone, same as every night since arriving at Fort Kessler. Posture straight, elbows close, eating slowly, methodically, like someone who didn't expect company and didn't need it. She cut her meatloaf into small pieces, steady and precise. She didn't look up when footsteps passed, when boots squeaked against the floor. Habit told her, keep your head down, control the perimeter, finish your meal. But tonight habit wasn't enough to stop memory. The day's sunlight had left ghosts behind her eyelids. Barclay's voice, Ghost Line, the sound of Huxley's breath catching. For a moment she wasn't tasting institutional food, she was tasting snow, copper, diesel fumes. She saw the shape of a man's back across her shoulders, felt his weight again, the drag of a sled on ice. She flexed her fingers around the fork until her knuckles whitened. Breathe in, chew, swallow, breathe out. A tray clattered onto the table across from her. Grace didn't flinch, but her eyes flicked up. Private Keller, the Arizona kid. He sat down without asking, without a word. His posture was stiff, as if he'd been ordered to be there but hadn't. He opened his carton of milk, eyes down. Then another tray. A recruit she barely knew. Then two more. In less than a minute half the table was full. No fanfare, no speeches, just quiet footsteps, quiet trays. None of them said a word. Not sorry, not we were wrong. They just sat, ate, and every few moments their eyes glanced her way, not with pity, not even with guilt, but with something closer to recognition. Like the first time you recognize a face from a photo and realize the story was real. Grace kept her expression neutral. She'd seen this before, the pivot from mockery to reverence. In Afghanistan once, in a special forces training detachment in Europe, in a humanitarian convoy in South America. Respect that arrived only after myth had been confirmed. But it always came too late. Too late to save the ones who'd been buried. Too late to unlearn the price of silence. Why Widow 27? The voice was young, careful, barely above a whisper. A recruit at the far end of the table. His eyes were steady, but his hand trembled around his fork. She didn't look up from her tray, didn't change expression. Because I've buried 26 of my team, she said evenly. I'm number 27. The table went still. No second question, no follow-up, just that. And the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. A few forks moved slowly again. Someone cleared his throat. The noise of the mess hall resumed around them like a tide, but at this table the air felt thicker. Grace finished her meal, wiped her hands on a paper napkin, and stood. The recruits didn't move, didn't block her, didn't fumble for words. She carried her tray to the return line, slid it onto the steel counter, and walked out into the cool night air. Outside, the sky had deepened to a bruised purple. Floodlights buzzed along the perimeter fence. Beyond them, the prairie rolled flat to the horizon. She walked toward the motor pool, boots striking gravel, hands tucked into her jacket pockets. The night smelled of oil and dry grass. She needed space, needed to move. Barkley was waiting by the Humvee, coat collar up against the wind. He didn't salute, neither did she. They hadn't saluted each other in years. He offered her a paper cup of coffee. She took it, fingers brushing his briefly. The warmth seeped into her skin. "You handled that well," he said. She didn't answer. "You could have humiliated him, Huxley." "I'm not here to humiliate," she said. Barkley studied her face in the dim light. The scar under her eye caught the glow, throwing a thin line of shadow down her cheek. "You're not here just to teach, either." Grace looked out at the dark prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped. "I'm here to make sure they learn before it costs them." Barkley nodded once. "You always were stubborn." She sipped the coffee, bitter, hot. "Stubborn kept me alive." They stood in silence for a moment. She felt the weight of his gaze but didn't meet it. She knew what he wanted to ask, the same thing everyone eventually asked. Why come back? Why not stay out? Why put yourself through this again? She saved him the trouble. "It's not redemption," she said quietly. "It's debt." Barkley's jaw tightened. "You don't owe anyone anything." "I owe them training." Her voice sharpened, then softened again. "If someone had taught us better, maybe." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The wind filled the space between her words. Barkley looked down at his boots. "They respect you now," he said at last. "They respect the story," she replied. "They don't know me yet." He gave a short, humorless chuckle. "They're about to." From the barracks behind them came the muffled sound of a bugle, a signal for night drills. Barkley tilted his head toward the parade ground. "You ready?" Grace set the empty coffee cup on the Humvee's hood. "Always." They walked back toward the floodlights together, boots crunching gravel in sync. Barkley peeled off toward the staff tent, leaving her at the edge of the field. Recruits were assembling under the cold glow, breath clouding the air. She scanned their faces, some pale, some eager, some still skeptical. Huxley was there, jaw clenched, eyes down. Keller stood a little taller than before. The youngest ones shifted nervously. Grace stepped into the center. No whistle, no clipboard, just her presence. The chatter dimmed. She let the silence work. Silence had weight if you knew how to hold it. "You're here because you think you're ready," she said at last. Her voice carried without shouting. "But you don't know what ready means. Not yet." She began to move among them, slow, deliberate. "Out there, you don't get second chances. Out there, you don't get to say, 'I didn't know.' You either know or you bury someone who trusted you." Her eyes caught Huxley's for a heartbeat. He looked away. "I'm not here to tell you war stories," she continued. "I'm here to teach you how not to become one." A ripple moved through the formation. Fear, curiosity, something else. She felt it but didn't stop. "We start with night navigation. No GPS, no lights, no excuses. Pair up. One compass per team. You've got 30 minutes to reach the ridge and back." The recruits hesitated, glancing at one another. She crossed her arms. "Move." They scrambled into pairs, fumbling with gear. Grace watched, measuring their movements, their posture, their breath. She saw who grabbed a partner quickly, who hesitated, who looked for someone stronger. Patterns, weak spots. She filed it all away. Barkley watched from the edge of the field, arms folded. He knew this was more than a drill. It was her way of taking their measure, seeing which of them might survive a ghost line of their own someday. He also knew she was measuring herself, testing if she could still do this without breaking. The last team disappeared into the dark. Grace checked her watch, then slung a small pack over her shoulder and followed, moving without a sound. She would shadow them, unseen, correcting mistakes before they turned lethal. This was her classroom now, prairie night, compass bearings, silence. As she walked into the darkness, the floodlights fell behind her. Stars opened above, sharp and cold. The air smelled of sage. Her bruises throbbed with each step, but she welcomed the pain. Pain was real. Pain kept you awake. Somewhere ahead a recruit whispered, "Left or right?" Another hissed back, "Left, I think." She angled toward them, listening. She wouldn't intervene yet. Let them stumble. Let them learn to recover. In the distance she saw a flash of memory, a ridge of ice instead of prairie, a sky the color of steel, a man's weight on her shoulders. She shook it off. Focus. These kids were her mission now. This was how you pay a debt, one lesson at a time, one night drill at a time, until maybe someone else makes it home. Back at the field, Barkley turned toward the staff tent, but not before glancing once more into the dark where she'd vanished. He thought of the conversation by the Humvee, of the word she'd used, debt. He wondered if she would ever believe she'd paid it. He wondered if she could. Grace moved silently through the grass, shadow among shadows. Ahead, two recruits stopped, arguing over the compass. She crouched, waiting, breath steady. The prairie wind whispered through the sage, carrying their voices to her. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat. You came back for them, she reminded herself. Not for ghosts, for them. When she opened her eyes again, the stars were sharp. The recruits were moving, and the night felt like a thin thread between past and future, taut and trembling. Why did the prairie sound like the sea when the wind rose? Grace paused, crouched low behind a clump of sage. Ahead of her, two silhouettes moved in stop-start bursts, flashlights forbidden, voices muted to hissed guesses. The night drill had been running for 20 minutes. Already she could tell who had instincts and who didn't. Compass bearings were one thing in a classroom. In the dark, when every shape became a threat and every sound felt magnified, it was different. The prairie had a way of showing you your own mind. She adjusted the strap of her pack. The bruises along her arms pulsed with heat, but she welcomed it. Pain was real. Pain kept you anchored in the present. She took one slow breath, eyes scanning the horizon. The ridge loomed ahead, black against darker black. Somewhere out there, Keller's team was moving well. Huxley was. A faint clatter, metal on rock, drifted back to her. She moved silently toward it, boots finding the soft earth between stones. She had learned to move like this years ago, a long winter when snow muffled everything except the sound of breath and the creak of frozen straps. Don't think about it. She blinked hard, pushed the memory down, kept walking. Two figures emerged from the dark, Huxley and a younger recruit she recognized only by his hesitant salute earlier that day. They were turned the wrong way, arguing over the compass. The younger one's hands shook. Huxley hissed something at him, grabbed the compass, pointed east. Grace stepped into their path without a sound. They both started. She held up one gloved hand for silence. "Bearing?" she asked quietly. Huxley's jaw clenched. "East-northeast." She tilted her head. "Show me." He hesitated, then extended the compass. She glanced at it, then at the stars. "You're 30 degrees off," she said. "You'd have walked into the drainage ditch and lost an hour." Huxley opened his mouth, closed it again. The younger recruit swallowed hard. Grace handed the compass back. "Find the North Star," she said, pointing upward. "Everything else moves, that doesn't." The younger recruit followed her finger, eyes wide. "That one." She nodded once. "Line it up with the edge of the compass housing. Adjust your bearing, move." They both nodded, turning to correct their course. She watched them for a moment, then fell in behind at a distance. No more words. Let them feel the terrain. Let them earn the correction. As she moved, she caught herself listening for another voice. the one that had whispered behind her on the ice, "If I pass out, don't stop." It came to her sometimes in training fields, in empty hallways, in the mess hall at night. She hated that she couldn't remember his face clearly anymore. 26 names, and she was losing pieces of them. That was another debt, keep them alive inside her, even as the world eroded the details. Ahead, Keller's team crested the ridge first, silhouettes sharp against the sky. Good. She had expected that. She watched them angle down the other side, then turned her attention back to Huxley and the younger recruit. They were moving better now, quieter, steadier. The younger one glanced back once, caught a glimpse of her shadow, and straightened his spine. At the halfway point, she closed the distance and spoke again. "Names," she said. The younger recruit almost tripped. "Ma'am." "Your names," she repeated. "I know Huxley, you." "Ree," he said quickly. "Private Ree." She nodded. "Ree, take point. Huxley, keep pace with him." They obeyed without question. She followed them through a shallow gully, the smell of damp earth rising. The stars wheeled overhead. For a moment she felt something unexpected, calm. Not peace exactly, but a kind of rhythm. Steps, breath, silence. Teaching them was like walking an edge. Part of her wanted to protect them from every mistake. Part of her knew mistakes were the only way they'd learn. They reached the turnback marker with 5 minutes to spare. Ree looked at her as if waiting for praise. She simply said, "Again," and gestured back toward the base. He swallowed and nodded. Huxley's eyes flickered, but he didn't argue. They set off. As they moved, Grace dropped back a few paces, watching their silhouettes. Huxley's gait was still too loud. Ree's shoulders hunched when he got nervous. She would break those habits out of them by the end of the week. She had to. The prairie wind picked up, carrying a smell she couldn't name. For an instant she was back in a ruined village across an ocean, crouched behind a collapsed wall, listening for footsteps. She shook her head, forced herself to focus on the present. Half a mile from the base, Ree stumbled over a hidden rut. His ankle twisted and he went down with a sharp breath. Huxley reached for him but hesitated, glancing at Grace. Old reflex. The instructor will handle it. She crouched beside Ree instead, eyes on Huxley. "What do you do?" she asked quietly. Huxley blinked. "A check for injury." "Then check," she said. He knelt, hands awkward but sincere, feeling along Ree's ankle. "Not broken," he muttered. "Just twisted." Grace nodded once. "Support him, you've got 2 miles." Huxley looked up. "Carry him." "Figure it out," she said, stepping back. He hesitated, then slung Ree's arm over his shoulder. They began moving again, slower but steady. Grace followed. She could have taken the weight herself. She could have radioed for transport, but this was the lesson. Out there, no one comes for you. You come for each other or you don't come back. They reached the base 20 minutes later, sweat freezing on their skin. The floodlights loomed ahead like a shoreline. Barkley was waiting near the staff tent, arms crossed. Keller's team was already back, catching their breath. A few others straggled in. Grace noted who arrived together, who arrived alone. Huxley lowered Ree onto a bench. Grace stepped close enough for only them to hear. "Better," she said. "Next time, faster." Huxley nodded, eyes down but steady. Ree looked up at her, lips pressed tight, but there was something like gratitude in his eyes. Grace turned to the rest of the recruits. "Tomorrow night we do it with full packs. Go hydrate, sleep. Be here at 0400. They dispersed, muttering, some glancing back at her. She watched them go until the field was empty except for Barkley. He walked over. "You push them hard," he said. "Not hard enough," she replied. "They're kids." "They won't be," she said quietly. "Not if they make it." Barkley studied her for a moment. Ree twisted his ankle. "He walked out under his own power," she said. "Good." Barkley hesitated. "And you, how's the leg?" She stiffened. "Fine." He gave a small nod, not pressing. "You're making progress." Grace looked out at the dark prairie. "Progress doesn't bring them back." "No," Barkley said softly, "but it might keep these ones alive." She didn't answer. He waited, then sighed and walked back toward the staff tent, leaving her alone under the floodlights. She stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of the night settle on her shoulders. She thought of Ree's trembling hands, of Huxley's silence, of Keller's steady pace. Small things, but maybe the start of something. Maybe. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and diesel. She closed her eyes and for a heartbeat saw 26 faces, names etched behind her eyelids like frost. She opened her eyes again, squared her shoulders and walked toward the barracks. Tomorrow would come early. Tomorrow the packs would be heavier. Tomorrow the lessons would cut closer to the bone. Inside the barracks lights were dim. Recruits lay in bunks, whispering, the low hum of exhaustion settling. She passed between rows, boots soft on the floor. Some pretended to be asleep, some watched her with open eyes. She didn't stop. She didn't speak. She reached her own small room at the end, closed the door behind her, and sat on the edge of the cot. The silence there was different, thicker, like water. She unlaced her boots slowly, set them side by side. Her hands trembled once, then stilled. She drew out a small photo from her pack, edges frayed. 26 faces. She touched it once lightly, then slid it back into the pocket. She lay back without turning on the light. In the dark she could hear the wind outside, the low murmur of the recruits. She thought of the question the kid had asked at dinner, why widow 27, and of her own answer. She wondered if she'd said too much. She wondered if she'd said enough. Her eyes closed, but sleep didn't come. She listened to her heartbeat, steady and slow, and counted the breaths between. Out there in the dark, somewhere a coyote called. The sound rolled over the prairie like a question. She whispered an answer no one heard. Not yet. Why did the morning smell like rain, even though the sky was clear? Grace caught it as she walked across the parade ground before dawn, a thin, metallic scent that always came before a storm or before something snapped. The floodlights still burned, casting long shadows across the packed dirt. Her bruises were fading to yellow now, but the stiffness in her right knee was worse after the night's sleep. She rolled her shoulders once, adjusted the straps of her own full pack, and faced the line of recruits. They were already assembled, eyes bleary, packs slung over shoulders, 40 pounds of gear each. Some stood straight, some sagged under the weight. Huxley avoided her gaze. Keller gave a curt nod. Ree's ankle was wrapped, but he had insisted on being there. She had let him. Pain was part of the lesson, but so was learning your limits. No GPS, no lights, no talking, she said, voice carrying just enough to reach the back. Today you learn what weight does to you in the dark. You learn before the world teaches you for real. She let that settle. The wind hissed along the prairie like sandpaper. You break formation, you double back and start again, she added. Pair up, same as last night. They scrambled to comply. Packs shifted. Straps tightened. Breathing changed, fast, shallow breaths turning into deliberate inhales. She watched for the small signs. She had learned to read them in other places, signs of fear, of panic, of someone about to freeze. Barkley stood off to the side, arms folded. He didn't interfere. This was her ground now. Grace led them out of the floodlights and into the pre-dawn dark. Stars still burned overhead. The air was sharp, clean, biting at their lungs. Boots crunched on frost-hardened grass. The line stretched, contracted, stretched again. Already she could hear Huxley murmuring to Ree, urging him to keep pace. Keller and his partner moved like a single unit, steady and quiet. Two others lagged, packs swaying. She dropped back to the stragglers. Weight on your hips, not your shoulders, she said softly. Lean forward, shorter steps. They adjusted. She moved on. The first mile passed in silence except for breath and boots. She felt her own heartbeat settle into a rhythm she knew too well. One foot, then the other, like crossing ice, like crossing time. The prairie smelled of sage and cold earth. Every so often she glanced at the horizon, gauging distance, gauging stars. They were on track. By the second mile, Ree's limp was obvious. He kept his mouth shut, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the back of Huxley's pack. Grace debated stepping in, then decided against it. This was part of the test, not just his body but Huxley's instinct to act. Leadership wasn't about swagger, it was about weight, about who you carried when you were already carrying yourself. Halfway up the ridge she heard the sound she had been waiting for, a muffled sob from somewhere near the rear. She slowed, scanning. One of the younger recruits had stopped, knees bent, hands braced on thighs, chest heaving, pack hanging crooked, panic written across his face. She walked back slow, deliberate. "What's your name?" she asked. He startled, eyes wide. "Trent, ma'am." "Breathe, Trent," she said, crouching to meet his eyes. "In, out, slow." "I can't," he broke off, breath hitching. "It's too heavy." "It's not the pack," she said quietly. "It's the story you're telling yourself about the pack." He blinked. Tears glimmered at the edges of his eyes but didn't fall. "Drop to one knee," she said. He did. She reached out, adjusted his straps, shifted the weight lower. "You can stand again now. When you do, you're going to take 3 slow breaths. Then you're going to walk, not run, not freeze, just walk." He nodded once, still shaking. She straightened. "Huxley," she called softly. He looked back, eyes wary. "Take Ree forward. I'll bring Trent up." He hesitated, then nodded, slinging Ree's arm over his shoulder and moving on. Grace crouched beside Trent again. "On 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. He stood, wobbly but upright. She placed a hand briefly at his shoulder blade. "Short steps, eyes on my boots, just walk." They moved together, his breath steadied, the stars shifted overhead. For a moment she felt the echo of another time, her own body broken, a voice behind her saying, "Keep walking." She almost whispered it aloud but stopped. This wasn't her story now. This was Trent's first crossing of the line between thinking and doing. By the time they reached the ridge the others were waiting, silhouettes against the pale hint of dawn. She guided Trent into the group, then faced them all. "This is where most of you stop believing you can," she said quietly. "This is also where you find out you're wrong." She let them catch their breath, then gestured down the far slope. "Back to base, same rules, go." They started down, slower now, but more deliberate. Grace stayed near the rear with Trent until his steps steadied. She watched Huxley supporting Ree, Keller helping another recruit with a loose strap. Small shifts, small signs. She felt something like the first tremor of hope. Half a mile from base, the horizon flared with the first streaks of sunrise, gold cutting across the dark. The floodlights ahead blinked out one by one. The prairie smelled of thawing earth. The wind was softer. Trent stumbled once but caught himself. Ree's limp worsened, but he refused to stop. Grace debated calling a halt, then decided against it. Sometimes you need to finish, even if it's ugly. They reached the parade ground as the sun cleared the horizon. Barkley was waiting, a clipboard in hand but not writing. He watched them file in, faces drawn but upright. "Drop packs," Grace ordered. Packs hit the ground with dull thuds, shoulders rolled, breathing slowed. She walked the line, eyes scanning each face. "This is what the first mile of a real op feels like," she said. "You're tired, you're scared, you're already telling yourself you can't, and that's before anyone shoots at you." No one spoke. Some shifted uncomfortably. She let the silence hold. "You're not here to impress me," she continued. "You're here to build a reflex you don't have yet, the reflex to move anyway, to carry weight you don't think you can, to carry someone else when your own legs are shaking." Her eyes landed on Huxley. He met her gaze briefly, then looked away. "You learn it now," she said softly, "or you learn it with someone bleeding in your arms." She stepped back. "Hydrate, stretch, debrief at 0900. They dispersed slowly, dragging packs toward the storage racks, filling canteens. Trent lingered near her, eyes flicking up as if wanting to speak. She gave a small nod, permission without words. He straightened, squared his shoulders, and limped after the others. Barkley walked over. "You broke one," he said. "I didn't break him," she replied. "I caught him before he broke." He nodded. Difference matters. They stood together, watching the recruits. The sun climbed, casting long shadows across the field. For a moment Grace felt the weight in her chest ease, just a fraction, like loosening a strap. "Coffee?" Barkley asked. She shook her head. "Later." He studied her face. "You can't carry them all, you know." She didn't answer. She looked at the recruits instead, lowering himself to stretch his ankle, Huxley filling 2 canteens, handing one to him without comment, Keller checking another's pack straps. Small signs, small changes. She thought of 26 faces again, names like pebbles in her pocket. She would never carry them all, but maybe she could carry enough. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of coffee from the mess hall. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't eaten breakfast. She didn't feel hungry. "Go easy on your knee," Barkley said quietly. She glanced at him. "I don't go easy." He gave a faint smile. "I know." She watched him walk back toward the staff tent, clipboard swinging at his side. She turned back to the field. The recruits were dispersing now, some glancing back at her. She didn't wave. She didn't nod. She simply stood, boots planted, letting them see her there. Sometimes leadership wasn't about moving first. Sometimes it was about standing still long enough for others to orient themselves. The sun was fully up now, bright on the frost. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling its warmth on her skin, and whispered under her breath, "One lesson at a time." No one heard, no one needed to. She turned toward the barracks. Another day waited, another drill, another chance to teach them before the world taught them harder. As she walked, she thought of the photo in her pocket. She thought of the names. She thought of the question that had started to form in her mind during the night drill, "When is enough enough?" And of the answer she didn't have yet. For now she walked, for now she trained, for now she carried the weight. The prairie wind rose behind her like the sea again, carrying dust and silence and the faint echo of boots in snow. Why was Barkley waiting at the edge of the field before sunrise? Grace caught sight of him as she stepped out of the barracks, boots still damp from the night dew. He stood near the flagpole, coat collar turned up, a manila folder tucked under his arm. She had learned long ago to read people by posture, and Barkley's posture said news. Not gossip, not routine. News. The recruits were still asleep, the base unusually quiet. A gull passed overhead, carried inland by some strange current, its cry thin and out of place. Grace adjusted the strap of her duffel. She had planned to run drills alone before breakfast, but Barkley's presence shifted her plan. He waited until she reached him. "Walk with me," he said, voice low. They moved across the empty parade ground, their shadows long in the dim light. The smell of diesel hung in the air. Grace kept her hands in her pockets. "You pushed them hard yesterday," Barkley began. "They pushed themselves," she said. "I just set the pace." "They're already different," he said, "even Huxley." She didn't answer. She had seen it too, small changes, edges softening, eyes focusing. But she also knew how fragile those changes were. One mistake and they'd snap back into old patterns. Barkley glanced at her. "You're limping." "Old injury," she said. "I manage." He didn't press. Instead he handed her the folder. "This came in last night." She took it but didn't open it yet. The weight of the paper was familiar. Orders, reports, briefings. She hated how easily her fingers remembered. "Office," he said. "It's not for the field." They crossed the courtyard in silence. Inside the command building the air smelled of coffee and floor wax. Barkley led her into his office and closed the door. The blinds were still drawn. A map of the region hung on the wall, dotted with pushpins. He gestured to a chair. She stayed standing. "Open it," he said. She flipped the folder open. Inside was a single page, a satellite image of a ridge line she didn't recognize, coordinates in the upper corner, and a brief typed paragraph. Her stomach tightened as she read. "Training exercise?" she asked. "Not exactly," Barkley said. She looked up, his face was unreadable. Then what? We've had reports from the northern range, he said. Unmarked drone activity. Someone been using our training area for their own purposes. Higher up wants eyes on it, quiet eyes. Recon, she asked. Assessment, he said. No engagement, no comms unless necessary. She closed the folder. Why me? You're already here, he said simply. You know how to move unseen, and he hesitated. It might be good for you. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Good for me. You've been teaching them for weeks, he said. You haven't left the perimeter once. You need air, Grace. I have air, she said flatly. Not like this. She set the folder on his desk. You want me to take a solo recon into an area with unknown activity, while I'm responsible for a class of undertrained cadets. I want you to take one of them with you, he said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. What? They need real-world exposure, he said. You can't teach everything on a parade ground. Pick one. Show them what it looks like. Controlled, limited, but real. No, she said. Barkley leaned forward. Grace. No, her voice sharpened, surprising even herself. You want me to babysit someone out there. You think that's how you teach them. I think it's how you teach you, he said softly. Silence filled the room, the hum of the air vent, the faint clatter of typewriter keys in the next office. Grace exhaled slowly, fighting the knot rising in her chest. You're trying to make me repeat ghost line, she said. Different coordinates, same mistake. No, he said. I'm trying to keep you from living there forever. She looked at him then, really looked. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the wear in his shoulders. He wasn't trying to punish her. He was trying to pull her back into the world. She hated him for it and in some deep part of her thanked him. Who? She asked at last, voice low. He didn't hesitate. Her hands tightened on the folder. The kid with the ankle. He's steady, Barkley said. He listens. He needs to see the reality behind the drills, and he believes in you now. She looked away. Belief gets you killed. Training keeps you alive, he said. You taught me that once. She closed her eyes, breathed out through her nose. When? Tomorrow night, he said. Briefing at 1900. She opened her eyes again. Fine. Barkley nodded once as if sealing a pact. Thank you. She picked up the folder, tucked it under her arm. Don't thank me yet, she said, and walked out. The rest of the day passed in a blur of drills. She led them through obstacle courses, weapons maintenance, silent movement exercises. She gave no hint of the mission ahead. She watched measuring his stride, his breathing, his instinct to check his partner's gear. He didn't complain about his ankle once. Huxley noticed the difference too, eyes flicking between them as if guessing something. By evening she was exhausted but restless. She sat on the edge of her bunk, folder open on her knees, reading the coordinates again and again. Satellite images, sparse notes, nothing about who might be flying the drones or why. The unknown gnawed at her, but more than that, the thought of taking gnawed at her. She had vowed never to drag another young soldier into a situation she couldn't control, and here she was about to do exactly that. She closed the folder, rubbed her eyes. Outside the window, the sky was deep orange, fading to indigo. Voices drifted up from the mess hall. Laughter, trays clattering. She wondered if they were laughing about her now or about something ordinary. She wondered if she would come back. A knock at the door. Come in, she said. Stepped inside, awkward in the narrow space. Ma'am, he said. Sergeant. She gestured to the chair. He stayed standing. What is it? She asked. I wanted to say thank you, he said. For last night. You didn't have to. He stopped, searching for words. You could have let me quit. She looked at him. If I'd let you quit, you'd have to live with that forever, she said. This way you just have a sore ankle. He gave a faint smile. Fair. She hesitated, then said, How's the ankle? Better, he said. Taped it. She nodded. Good, get some sleep, tomorrow's long. He started to turn, then paused. "Ma'am, Sergeant," he shifted his weight. "Are the stories true about Ghost Line?" She held his gaze for a long moment. "Some," she said at last. "Some aren't. Doesn't matter. What matters is what you learn from them." He nodded, eyes searching hers. "What did you learn?" She looked down at her hands. "That you never really come back," she said quietly. "But you can come back enough to teach." He swallowed. "Good night, Sergeant." "Good night, Ree," she said. He left, closing the door softly. She sat there for a long time, folder on her knees, listening to the wind outside. She thought of 26 names. She thought of the coyote's cry. She thought of Barkley's words, "You need air, Grace." Tomorrow night she would find out if that was true. She lay back on the bunk, eyes open to the dark, and whispered a promise to no one. "Not this time," she said. "Not again." Outside, the prairie lay silent under the stars. Somewhere far north, a drone's shadow passed over a ridge. No one at Fort Kessler saw it. No one except the satellite whose image now lay in a folder on Grace Mallory's desk. Why did the road north feel like leaving more than the base? Grace watched the headlights of the Humvee stretch across the empty highway, twin spears of pale light fading into sagebrush. Beside her in the passenger seat, Ree sat very straight, helmet strap fastened, gloved hands gripping his knees. He had been silent since they rolled out of Fort Kessler. In the back, their packs and weapons lay strapped down. Light gear for reconnaissance, enough for 48 hours on foot. She had loaded it herself, methodical, checking every strap twice. Wind whistled through a gap in the window. The sky was black velvet sprinkled with cold stars. Grace kept her eyes on the road, one hand steady on the wheel, the other on the gear shift. The folder with coordinates sat folded in the dash tray, its edges already softened by her thumb. She could recite the numbers now without looking. She had done that with other coordinates once, and she hated how easily it came back. Ree shifted, breaking the silence. "How far?" 70 miles to the drop point," she said. "Then we walk." He nodded, jaw tight. Is it dangerous?" She kept her eyes on the road. "Everything's dangerous if you don't pay attention." He gave a faint, humorless chuckle. "That's not an answer." "No," she said quietly, "it is." They drove on. The prairie rolled past, dark and endless. A sign flashed by, "No services for 50 miles." Ree stared out the window. Grace could see his reflection in the glass, young, tense, trying to hide it. She remembered being that young. She remembered sitting in a truck next to someone older, trying to read their silence. At the trailhead, they killed the headlights. Grace parked in the shadow of a rocky outcrop. The engine ticked as it cooled. Beyond the windshield, the land rose into a low ridge, jagged and black against the stars. Somewhere beyond that ridge the drones had been sighted. She listened. Wind through grass, a far-off coyote. No engines. No lights. "Out," she said. They moved quickly, practiced, packs on, weapons slung, compass bearings checked. She made Ree call out the azimuth to force him to orient himself. He did, voice low but steady. She nodded once and started walking. The ground underfoot was dry, dotted with stones. The wind carried a faint metallic tang. They moved in silence, boots finding the softest patches. She set a slow, steady pace. Ree followed, breathing measured. After a mile, she glanced back. His shoulders were squared, eyes scanning. Good. 2 miles in, she called a halt, crouched behind a boulder and held up a hand. Ree froze, eyes wide. She tilted her head, listening. A faint buzz, high-pitched, came from somewhere ahead, too faint to be an insect. She felt the hair on her arms rise. "What is it?" Ree whispered. She didn't answer. She eased up, peered over the rock. In the distance, a small shape moved against the stars. No lights, no markings. It drifted like a moth, then banked slowly and disappeared behind the ridge. She watched until the sound faded. "Drone," she said finally, unmarked. Ree's throat bobbed. "Ours." "No." He swallowed. "What do we do?" "Keep moving," she said. "Stay low." They skirted the base of the ridge, moving in and out of shadows. The air smelled of iron now. Grace's muscles remembered the rhythm. Crouch, move, listen, move. For a heartbeat she was back on the ice, dragging weight, heart hammering. She shook it off. This was not then. This was now. She had a chance to do it right. Halfway up the slope, Reese stumbled on loose gravel. She caught his arm, steadied him, put a finger to her lips. His eyes were wide, but he nodded. They crouched behind a jagged outcrop. The drone buzz returned, louder, passing somewhere overhead. She pressed her back to the stone, holding her breath. The sound faded, then returned fainter, then was gone. Ree let out a shaky exhale. How do you stay so calm? She looked at him. I'm not calm, she said. I'm practiced. He nodded, eyes flicking away. She could see his pulse jumping at his neck. We're almost to the coordinates, she said softly. After that observation, no contact. What are we observing? Whoever's flying them, she said. He hesitated. And if we see them? We stay unseen, she said. Rule 1. They climbed the last stretch of the ridge on hands and knees, careful not to dislodge stones. At the top she signaled for him to crawl beside her. They peered over. Below them a narrow valley opened, floor lined with pale gravel and sparse brush. In the center stood a makeshift structure, nothing more than a frame of metal poles and canvas, but inside a glow of blue light flickered. 3 figures moved around it, indistinct shapes. One held a tablet. Another adjusted something on a tripod. Above them a drone hovered, lights off, rotors whispering. Grace felt her stomach tighten. Whoever they were, they didn't belong here, and they were careful. No vehicles visible, no campfire, no noise beyond the machines. Ree's breath hitched. She touched his arm lightly, a signal to stay still. They lay there for a long time, watching. The figures moved with precision, setting up equipment, scanning the horizon. Every so often the drone dipped low, then rose again. Grace took mental notes, positions, timings, gear. She wished she had a camera, but she had only her eyes. She forced herself to focus on the details, not on the ghosts rising in her chest. After 20 minutes the figures packed up quickly, loading gear into cases. The drone rose higher, drifted east, then blinked out as if someone had killed its rotors midair. The figures melted into the shadows of the valley. Gone. Ree shifted. Where did they go? He whispered. Stay still, she murmured. Minutes passed. Silence returned. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of dust. She waited until she was sure they were alone. Then she exhaled slowly. Back, she said. Same route. Ree looked at her, eyes wide. That's it. For tonight, she said. They crawled back from the ridge, moving low, then rose and began the slow trek back to the Humvee. The night seemed larger now, the stars sharper. Ree's breathing was ragged but steady. After a mile he spoke. Was it like this, ghost line? She didn't look at him. Worse. He was silent for a moment. How did you keep moving? She kept her eyes on the path. You don't think about the end, she said. You just do the next thing. He nodded slowly. And if you can't? You do it anyway, she said quietly. They walked in silence for a long time. Her mind drifted back to a voice she hadn't heard in years. If I pass out, don't stop. Just keep walking. She wondered if Ree would ever have to say that to someone. She hoped not. At the Humvee, she scanned the horizon one last time before unlocking the doors. They climbed in, shut themselves inside. The silence was thick. She started the engine but didn't put it in gear. Ree looked at her. Why did you pick me? She gripped the wheel, knuckles white. Because you listen, she said. He blinked. That's all. That's everything, she said. He looked down at his hands. I was scared up there. Good, she said. Fear keeps you alive, panic gets you killed. He nodded, swallowing. She put the Humvee in gear and pulled onto the empty road. The tires hummed on asphalt. The stars wheeled overhead. She felt the weight of the folder in the dash tray like a stone. She had done it. She had taken someone into the dark and brought him back, but the ghosts had come with her. Halfway back to Fort Kessler, she realized her hands were trembling on the wheel. She flexed them, one at a time, until they stilled. She thought of Barclay's face when she'd agreed. She thought of the 26 names. She thought of Reese sitting beside her, eyes closed now, head leaning against the window, breathing slow. She whispered so softly it was almost breath, "Not this time." The road stretched ahead, black ribbon through black land, leading back to a base full of sleeping recruits who had no idea how close the world really was. Grace kept driving. Why did the base feel different when they rolled back through the gate? Grace noticed it before the guard even waved them through. Same chain-link fence, same floodlights, same sleepy sentry with a clipboard, yet something in the air had shifted, as if the perimeter knew they'd crossed into the dark and back again. She cut the Humvee's engine and sat for a moment, hands resting on the wheel. Reese stared straight ahead, helmet off now, hair damp with sweat. His eyes were wide but distant, like he'd left a part of himself somewhere out on that ridge. "Go shower, sleep," she said quietly. "We debrief at 1400. "Yes, Sergeant," he murmured. He climbed out, slinging his pack over one shoulder. Before he shut the door he hesitated, looked back at her. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. Then he was gone, boots fatting into the dark. She stayed in the driver's seat a long time, staring at her own reflection in the windshield. The bruises on her arms had yellowed, but her face looked older than it had yesterday morning. She rubbed a hand across her eyes, then opened the door and stepped into the cold. The showers were empty. Steam hissed from a single pipe. She stood under the spray, fully clothed at first, water soaking into the fabric, then stripped and let the heat beat down on her skin. Her hands trembled when she reached for the soap. She pressed her palms flat against the tile, head bowed, water streaming off her hair. "Not this time," she whispered. "Not again." But Ghost Line didn't care. Ghost Line came anyway. The crunch of snow under boots, the smell of blood and diesel, the weight on her back, the voice telling her to keep walking. She shut her eyes tight, water running down her cheeks like meltwater. Her nails dug into the grout. A knock on the locker room door snapped her out of it. "Sergeant," a voice called, "Barclay." She turned off the water, wrapped herself in a towel, and opened the door a crack. He stood there with a mug of coffee, eyes soft but alert. "You're back," he said. She gave a thin smile. "Looks like it." "How re?" "Sleeping," he did well. Barclay nodded. "And you?" She looked away. "I don't know yet." He held out the mug. She took it, fingers brushing his. The coffee was hot and bitter. She drank half of it before speaking again. "They were professionals out there," she said. "No markings, no noise, in and out." He frowned. "How close?" "Too close," she said. "We watched them for 20 minutes. They knew the terrain." "Any idea who?" She shook her head. "Not yet, but they're careful, and they're not ours." He exhaled through his nose, a slow, heavy sound. "We'll pass it up the chain." "Do it quietly," she said. "They're listening." He studied her face. "Grace, are you all right?" She forced a smile. "I'm teaching, that's all." He didn't believe her, but he didn't push. "Debrief at 1400, he said softly. She nodded. 1400. He left, boots echoing down the hall. She leaned against the doorframe, coffee warming her hands, and closed her eyes. She was back, but part of her was still on that ridge. The debrief room smelled of paper and stale air. Reese sat at one end of the table, back straight, eyes fixed on a point on the wall. His uniform was clean, his ankle taped, but there was a new set to his jaw. Barclay sat opposite, notes in front of him. Grace stood at the head of the table, folder open. She kept her voice even as she laid out what they had seen. The structure, the equipment, the unmarked drone, the 3 figures. Reese spoke only when asked, describing bearings, times, movements. His answers were crisp, factual. But when she glanced at him, she could see his hands trembling slightly under the table. Barclay listened, face unreadable. When they finished, he closed his notebook and looked at Ree. "You did well," he said. Ree blinked. "Thank you, sir." Dismissed, Barkley said. Get some rest. Ree stood, saluted Grace instinctively, then left. The door closed softly behind him. Barkley leaned back. He saw something real last night. Grace stared at the empty doorway. He held up. So did you, Barkley said. She didn't answer. She stared at the map on the wall instead, at the coordinates she now knew by heart. The silence stretched. Finally Barkley said, "This isn't Ghost Line." She turned on him, eyes hard. "Don't tell me what it is." He held her gaze. "Then tell me what it is." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat felt tight. "It's another chance to lose someone," she said softly. "That's all I see." "Or another chance not to," he said. She looked away, blinking hard. "You didn't see him out there, Ree. He's a kid." "He's a soldier," Barkley said gently. "And you just gave him a lesson no classroom could." She sank into a chair, head in her hands. "I swore I wouldn't do this again." "You didn't," he said. "Not the same way." She exhaled slowly, trying to slow her heartbeat. "I can't keep carrying them." "You're not carrying them," he said. "You're showing them how to carry themselves." She looked up at him. His eyes were steady, calm. For a moment she felt the urge to tell him everything, every detail she had never spoken aloud about Ghost Line, about the cold, about the voice that had gone silent behind her. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead she said, "They're not ready." "They will be," he said, "because you're here." She shook her head, a small, bitter laugh escaping. "I'm a myth to them." "Maybe," he said, "but myths teach too." That night she didn't go to the mess hall. She sat alone in her room, boots off, staring at the photo of 26 faces. She traced each name with her thumb, whispering them under her breath. She wondered which one she would lose next, even though she knew the question was unfair. Ree was alive. The recruits were alive. She was here, yet her body still braced for the sound of a voice going silent. A soft knock at the door. She hesitated, then opened it. Ree stood there, hair damp from a shower, eyes clearer now. "Come in," she said. He stepped inside, hands clasped behind his back like he didn't know what to do with them. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "My head's full." She nodded. "Sit." He sat on the edge of the chair. "Out there," he stopped, searching. "Out there I wasn't sure if I was going to freeze or run." "But you didn't," she said. "No," he said, "because you were there." She looked at him. "You won't always have someone there." "I know," he said quietly. "But last night I learned I don't have to panic. That's something." She felt a knot in her chest loosen just slightly. "That's the point," she said. He hesitated, then said, "I know you think we only respect the story, but I respect you." The words landed harder than she expected. She looked away, blinking. "Get some sleep," she said softly. He stood. "Good night, Sergeant." "Good night, Ree." After he left she sat back, hands covering her face. For the first time since she'd returned to Fort Kessler, she felt something shift inside her, not the weight lifting, but the weight redistributing, like a pack adjusted to sit on the hips instead of the shoulders. She thought of Barkley's words, "You're showing them how to carry themselves." She whispered to the photo, to the names, "Maybe that's enough." Outside the window the prairie wind rose, carrying the smell of rain, though the sky was still clear. At dawn she walked the perimeter alone, boots crunching on gravel. The air was cold, crisp, full of possibility and threat. She thought of Ree's trembling hands, of Huxley's new quiet, of Keller's steady pace. She thought of the unmarked drone slipping through their sky. She thought of Ghost Line. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if the recruits would be ready, or if she would. But for the first time she let herself imagine that coming back hadn't been a mistake. That maybe, just maybe, she was building something that would outlast her ghosts. She stopped at the edge of the field, hands in her pockets, watching the first light break over the horizon. The wind tugged at her hair. She stood still, breathing it in. "Sometimes," she murmured, "you teach by surviving." No one heard, no one needed to. Why did the sky look lighter than it should at 4 a.m.? Grace watched it from the edge of the parade ground, a thin line of pale gray bleeding up from the horizon. No bugle yet, no sound of boots, just wind, dust, and the faint smell of rain that still hadn't come. She rubbed her palms together, feeling the calluses. Today would be the last full exercise before the cadets moved on to the next phase. Today she would decide whether any of them were ready. Behind her the barracks door opened. One by one the recruits emerged, packs on, helmets buckled. Huxley stood a little taller now. Ree's limp was gone. Keller moved with quiet confidence. They formed up without her saying a word. She saw it happen, the subtle self-organization, the glances, the spacing. Discipline beginning to take root. She stepped in front of them. "No briefing today," she said quietly. "You already know what to do." They nodded, a ripple of determination moving down the line. "We're going out one last time," she said. "No compasses, no maps. You'll navigate by landmarks and instinct. Bring each other home." No one asked a question. No one made a joke. She slung her own pack, turned toward the prairie, and started walking. They followed. The land rolled out flat and gray under a sky the color of steel. A hawk circled far above, silent. Grace kept the pace steady, eyes scanning. Every so often she let the line drift, forcing them to self-correct. She saw Huxley checking Ree's footing, Keller signaling quietly to another pair. She didn't intervene. She only watched. By the third mile the wind had picked up, carrying dust into their faces. One recruit faltered, knees wobbling. Before Grace could move, Huxley stepped out of line, adjusted the kid's pack, whispered something, and guided him back into rhythm. Grace felt a strange ache in her chest, pride edged with sorrow. They reached the ridge just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The sky had darkened, clouds piling up, lightning flickering far to the west. Grace called a halt, crouched, scanned the horizon. Nothing but grass and rock. No drones, no strangers, only the storm rolling in. "Shelter," she said. "Find it." The recruits fanned out, eyes searching. Keller spotted a shallow overhang near a stand of juniper. They moved toward it, quick but controlled, helping one another over the rocks. Grace followed last, watching their backs. The rain came harder now, drumming on their helmets. Under the overhang they huddled close, packs against the wall. Steam rose from their shoulders. Grace stayed near the entrance, scanning the open land, water running down her face. She felt the ghosts stirring again, the sound of rain on ice, the smell of blood. She clenched her fists until her nails dug into her palms. Ree moved to her side, voice low. "We're okay," he said. She glanced at him. His face was pale but steady. "You think so?" "I know so," he said, "because of you." The words hit her like a pulse. She turned back to the rain, swallowing hard. When the storm passed they emerged into a world scrubbed clean. The sky had broken open to a pale blue, the prairie shining wet and sharp. The recruits moved out without being told, spacing themselves naturally, eyes scanning. Grace fell in behind, letting them lead. She felt the ghosts press closer, 26 faces, the weight of a sled, the voice behind her saying, "Don't stop." She slowed, stopped altogether, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The line kept moving for a few paces before they noticed and turned. "Sergeant," Ree called softly. She stood there, rain dripping from her hair, the weight of years pressing down. For a heartbeat she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The wind hissed through the grass like a whisper. Not again, she thought, not here. Ree stepped back toward her, hesitant. "We're here," he said quietly. "We're not gone." She blinked, met his eyes, and saw not fear but steadiness. She drew a slow breath. Her chest loosened. She nodded once. "Take point," she said. He turned, signaled the others, and started forward. They moved as a unit now, pace measured, eyes forward. Grace followed, lighter somehow, like shifting a pack from the shoulders to the hips. The ghosts were still there, but they were behind her now, not on her back. They reached the base by midday. No bugle greeted them, no fanfare. They dropped their packs in silence, then lined up without being told. Grace walked the line slowly, eyes on each face. Dust streaked with rain, fatigue, but also something else, quiet pride. "You're not finished," she said softly. "But you're closer. Remember this feeling. It's not glory, it's not applause. It's just doing the hard thing together." No one spoke. She saw Huxley glance at Ree and nod. She saw Keller stand a little straighter. She stepped back, dismissed. They broke formation, moving toward the barracks, boots squelching in wet dirt. None of them looked back. She watched them go until the field was empty. Barkley appeared at her shoulder. "They've changed," he said. "So have I," she murmured. He studied her face, ghost line. She looked at him, eyes clear for the first time. "Still there, but it's not the only thing." He nodded slowly. "Good." They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the clouds drift. Then he said, "You could leave now, take the discharge, no one would question it." She shook her head. "Not yet." He smiled faintly. "You'll know when." She gave a small nod. "Maybe." That evening the mess hall was full but quiet. Trays clattered softly, voices low. Grace sat at her usual table in the back. This time she wasn't alone. One by one the recruits came, Huxley, Keller, Ree, the others. They didn't ask permission. They just sat, eating slowly, shoulders brushing. No speeches. No apologies, just presence. Grace ate in silence, feeling the warmth of bodies around her, the low murmur of conversation. For the first time since her return she felt something like belonging. Not heroism, not forgiveness, just the simple weight of being part of a table. Ree leaned slightly toward her, voice barely above a whisper. "You taught us more than drills," he said. She didn't look up from her tray. "I taught you what someone once taught me," she said quietly. "How to keep walking." He nodded, eyes lowered. "Thank you." She chewed, swallowed, set down her fork. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just be ready. That's how you thank me." He smiled faintly. "We will." They ate in silence after that, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full. Later, in her small room, Grace took out the photo of 26 faces. She looked at it a long time, then set it gently in the drawer instead of tucking it back into her pocket. She closed the drawer softly, like closing a door. She sat on the edge of the cot, boots off, listening to the wind outside. It smelled of rain and sage. She thought of the recruits asleep down the hall, of retaking point, of Huxley steadying another soldier without being told. She thought of Barkley's words, "You're showing them how to carry themselves." For the first time she let herself believe it. She lay back, eyes open to the dark ceiling. Her heartbeat was steady, slow. She whispered into the quiet, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." No one heard, no one needed to. Outside, the prairie wind rose and fell, carrying away the last echo of Ghost Line. This closes the arc with the quiet, moral reflection you asked for. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.